Hi guys, welcome back to LAB. I'm so sorry there was no video last week. I was away on holiday in Italy and time just got away from me and I didn't get a chance to post anything. So I'm really sorry, but I am back now this week with a video on GDPR. You cannot have missed the phenomenon that is GDPR. No doubt you've had endless emails in your inbox asking people to opt in and telling you that you've updated your privacy policy. So GDPR is what this is all about. The General Data Protection Regulation, which came into force on the 25th of May and replaces the old Data Protection Act. So before we go into detail, I'm just going to explain that this video is not an in-depth analysis of the GDPR regulation itself. I am going to direct you towards some other articles that might be of use to you in the description, but this video is more a video about the practical implications of GDPR on law firms, because I think this is something that you could potentially be questioned about as part of your application process or interview, because it's one of the biggest law reforms to affect the legal profession in recent history. First of all, a couple of key things to realise about the regulation. So it is a regulation and therefore forms part of EU law, but it will be implemented directly into English law by way of the updated Data Protection Act. So sadly, we will not escape GDPR when we Brexit next year because it will form part of our English statute. Second thing to note is that although there's been a load of hoo-ha about GDPR, are we GDPR ready? Do you know what the sanctions are? Have you put all these protective measures in place? That privacy is nothing new to the legal profession. As lawyers and law firms, we have always had obligations to protect our clients' data and protect our clients' privacy under the old Data Protection Act and as part of our Solicitors Regulation Authority obligations. So most law firms should already have privacy measures in place, and GDPR is just calling for a review and update of those processes to ensure we're compliant. So a couple of the big changes then are to consent and to the sanctions. So first of all, with consent, it is no longer sufficient to have automatic or implied consent by way of a tick box or something similar. Clients now have to actively give their consent and actively opt in. So it has to be free, informed and unambiguous, and there has to be a way of storing that consent on file. So a physical form with a signature on it or some equivalent so that it's tangible and we can always relate to it and refer to it and show that we have that consent that's been given to us. The second thing is in relation to sanctions. Wowza. The sanctions have upped their game considerably from under the Data Protection Act. Under the Data Protection Act, it used to be a maximum fine of £500,000, but under GDPR, it is a maximum fine of either 4% of turnover or a whopping £17 million as the maximum sanctions that can be given. And that's not to say that every breach will attract that level of sanction. It will completely depend on what kind of breach has been committed, the seriousness of it, and the law firm's conduct around that breach and what's led to it. So there will be smaller sanctions, but that is the scaremonger figures to say you really need to get in line because these sanctions are serious if you are found to breach. So what kind of things have law firms been doing in order to prepare for the implementation of GDPR? So first of all, there is an importance in knowing what data you are storing. So there will probably be calls for audits and general housekeeping overhauls so that we really know what data we're holding to make sure that we have a good reason and lawful reason to be holding that data and that we are storing it securely. So there will be a big audit of all the data that we hold, and they will be getting rid of any data which we don't need and making sure the data that we do have is stored properly, securely, and with a way of monitoring how long we've held that data for to make sure we don't hold it for too long or unnecessarily. In terms of securely storing data, this relates to both online and physical, because normally a law firm will have a physical paper file and also an online file for each client or each case that we're running. So GDPR may call for an overhaul in how we manage both of those systems. So a new filing system, new filing cabinets, new places for storing physical documents and data, but also potentially new online systems with higher security and more robust ways of measuring data and collecting, storing and protecting data. So potentially new case management systems, and also to increase cyber security as well against any potential breaches or security hacks. Another thing which as law firms have to bear in mind is not just how we are storing this data, but how we are communicating it as well. Because as lawyers and law firms, we do have to send information in and out of the office, both via the web and also physically via the post. So we need to make sure that any information which we have and we are responsible for is safely and securely communicated. So if it's something that's going by post, we need to make sure that it attracts the right level of postage. For example, it may be via document exchange, or it may be hand delivered, or it may have to go by registered post, depending on what kind of information is contained within the documentation. And when it's going online, we need to think about whether it needs to be sent encrypted or with a password or with an increased level of security if it's being communicated outside of our firm. So those are things as well that we have to think about on a day-to-day basis. In light of the new sanctions, which I mentioned earlier, another thing which a law firm might want to think about is increasing its insurance level, or getting an additional policy which covers specifically against GDPR breach, because those sanctions are large, as we've discussed, and normal indemnity insurance may well not cover against breaches of data protection issues. So that's another thing which a law firm may want to consider is, are all its insurance policies in order and sufficient enough to cover against breach? Another obligation which we have under GDPR is to notify the regulator and potentially the client as well of any breaches which may affect their rights or freedoms. So we need to have robust measures in place to detect any potential breaches and make sure these are notified to the relevant person promptly. So those are some of the practical things which law firms and lawyers may be doing to prepare for, have done to prepare for the implementation of GDPR. So as you can see, that is quite a lot of administrative work. And as law firms are functioning businesses, one of the things that that's going to attract is an increased outlay on costs, which is a drawback for law firms. However, it's not all doom and gloom, because there are some positives to GDPR as well. First of all, obviously having increased security and robust measures in place to protect data keeps everyone's mind at ease, and it's a benefit for everyone to have these measures in place. But secondly, it also increases trust from our clients. If our clients know that that data is securely stored and protected and the risk of breach is minimal, then it's going to actually increase the trust and make the relationship better between you and our client, between you and your client, which will obviously make the process of running their claim a lot better and a lot easier. So there are benefits as well, and if you are asked to discuss this in an interview type question or in a written answer, then it is a good idea to discuss both the pros and the cons, and then come to a reasoned decision yourself, because there is a lot to consider with GDPR. And I hope that this video has helped you to kind of gain an insight into a little bit about what goes on the ground in law firms, because I know it can be difficult as a student to actually envisage how all of this makes a difference and makes a change to lawyering generally. So hopefully that's been helpful to you. I'll link some articles in the description, and as always, please leave me some feedback as to whether this has been helpful or not, and I will see you in my next video. Take care, guys.